Is your family farm's future uncertain? Silence may be the biggest risk of all. Discover how open conversations and gradual planning can secure your legacy and empower the next generation. Don't wait, start the dialogue today. Learn more and download a transition planning checklist at fcc.ca/knowledge.
Our sponsors are the Corn School, MNP, and Black Earth. Black Earth offers a full suite of humic solutions, from high-purity granules to powder, liquid, and soluble formulations, all powered by pure humulate. Trusted by growers worldwide from one of the world's rarest humulate reserves. Grow stronger with the power of Black Earth humulate. Learn more from Mind to Market. Visit blackearth.com. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and I am, as always, super excited about today's conversation. I was telling our guests just before we came live, maybe it would have been better a week or two ago, as some silage harvest has already happened here in Ontario and points west, but there's still plenty to do, and there's still plenty to unpack on this topic. But before we get there, a reminder, of course, if you collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. Let us know you took in the show. We'll get you those CEU credits. And while you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter, and you will get a reminder of upcoming shows. And of course, that reminder of that link just to click on through and make sure you get all those hard-earned credits. Welcome to everyone joining us in the chat as well. Let us know where things are at, where you are, where harvest is at, and whether or not you got any rain. If you're in Manitoba, maybe a little south of there, it sounds like you may need a dinghy. So sorry about that. Wrong time of year for it. Okay, tonight's topic, though, we are going to talk about silage and focused on making silage in a less than ideal year. In this scenario, this year in Ontario, it's all about dry and drought. And so to have that conversation, let's bring in our guests. We've got Paul Hermans with Corteva, based not far from where I am, and Olivia Noorenberghe with Pride Seeds, based near Embro, Ontario. Welcome here, both of you.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Lyndsey.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So, Olivia, I'll start with you. It's been a little while since you've been on the show. Thanks for saying yes and coming on back. Remind us sort of what area of the province do you cover, and how are things looking this week? You were very busy today out in the field.
Yeah, so I cover kind of the London to Niagara region. I would say it's very variable across my territory that I cover. You know, we do have some of the nice soils of Perth and Oxford and Huron County, but then, I do cover Norfolk as well. So on the sands, we've had some challenging conditions there with limited rainfall. And then, up into Niagara Haldimand, a bit of a challenge as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, Paul, again, we're not that far from each other, but goodness, what a difference that short drive makes, because where I am, yes, some challenges, but not nearly as bad as some of the territory you cover. How are things looking right now?
Any agronomist's answer is it depends, Lyndsey. So I cover that kind of Brockville up to Renfrew County over to the Quebec border and the Pontiac side, but a lot depends on what areas that got rain, soil type, and everything else. I'm just looking at rainfall stations in the area. You know, we've had some stations 4 to 7 inches of rain, and that's it for the entire season since May. 7 to 9 inches behind normal. So it's quite a variable situation out there. And soil type plays a really big factor in terms of moisture holding capacity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A huge part of that. But as you mentioned, there's only so much crops can do on a little rain. And I know for any of our friends joining from out west, 7 inches of rain might sound like a lot if you're perhaps growing a wheat crop, but corn, beans, a bit of a different beast at times. So that is a big difference. Olivia, I'll start with you. You were just on a Corn School episode talking exactly this about what the challenges are in a tough year. I want to start with one of the things that does often come up is we're looking at a crop that is stressed. We're looking at a reduced yield on that crop, maybe a different quality parameter than usual. And I've heard said, well, cut higher to maybe avoid some of those nitrates, but maybe that's not necessarily what we need to be doing. How do we unpack that first question?
Yeah, I would say that that has been something that has historically been said just because typically nitrates are found in higher quantities in the lower one third of the plant. I guess with the drought, though, the concern is okay, if I'm chopping higher, I'm going to reduce the nitrate load maybe, but tonnage is the concern there. Obviously, we're already dealing with a crop that is maybe a little bit lower in tonnage than normal just because of the year that we've had. So that's not something that I would typically recommend, just given the situation. There are ways to kind of deal with nitrate load. Obviously, by fermentation through the ensiling process, you can actually reduce that by around 40 to 60%. So if it is fermenting, we are going to reduce that nitrate load. I would say it's kind of important to get out there and maybe do some stock nitrate tests just to kind of see what you're dealing with and what kind of concerns we might have with the crop that's there.
Now, Paul and Warren has mentioned this, and maybe this is also a good place to start. Is, of course, we will talk about the impact on the livestock that will eventually eat this silage, because there are considerations there, nitrates notwithstanding, other ones as well. But the very first thing we do have to think about, of course, is human health. And Warren shares that he's seeing a lot more, shares and tweets and snaps of silo gas. I would say the same, and probably different people from Warren. Silo gas is one of those things that, for some people, they've never seen it, but it does seem more common. Is that because of droughted corn? What causes silo gas? What do we need to know?
Yeah, it's because of definitely because of the drought situation that we're in and everything else. And maybe if I could put up slide number 1 from Jay, just kind of echoing some of the, this high chop, low chop situation and everything else. I'd echo exactly what Olivia said about, let's not high chop. We got to get as much off it. But the whole caveat to that is making sure that we have a good fermentation process and everything else. So bacteria, inoculants basically that would help with that, to really speed up that process, rapid react inoculants. And again, echoing that, we got to get as much feed off as we can. We always talk about, for every 4 inches, it's about a ton of wet silage yield. So that can add up this year if you're high chopping, 8 to 12 inches higher. But definitely keeping an eye on silo gases. Don't enter into it. Give it a few days. Have a buddy on the side, and that whole safety aspect of it going forward. We haven't had much rain, and where I get concerned about chopping is, green chop from a cow or livestock standpoint with nitrate poisoning. And if we had a rain, like I was going to chop tomorrow and I had a big rain today, then that would be the only case that I would say, hey, let's wait 5-7 days. That plant's going to take up more moisture into the stock and everything else, and kind of go from there. And then that whole chop length and moisture for proper fermentation, we don't have as, half of the yield is from the grain component. We don't have as much starch in our corn samples, and depending on the structure we're putting it into, if we go with a longer theoretical length of cut, you can have more air pockets. You don't have that weight, so we could have more potential yeast and molds and hot spots in our silage process, basically from a storage standpoint.
So, okay, so I want to just review this so that we hit on these things really key. So silo gas, is my understanding, that is like the risk is when it first begins to ensile, right?
Yes.
Like
yes.
it's in that very first while of either putting it in the bunk or the bag or whatever. Right. So
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I think they say like around the first 12 to 40 hours or when it's typically the worst.
Okay, so definitely high alert when you're first putting this into either the bag or the bunk. I think, Paul, you're being very kind that we would get a rain and then have to delay 5 to 7 days, but it is really important, right? That a rain would make nitrate available, right? And the
Yes.
plant would take it up, and then we'd have potentially even higher nitrates in that plant.
Exactly. Because you look at it with nitrogen moves, right, by mass flow, basically rain to take it to the roots and everything else. And then I have up on here, we know we have a lot of sugars and yeast just because in a dry year.
Right.
So when you're feeding this, there's more potential. It's next year when we start thinking about June, July, and August and the hot months, you bring that silage back out, and if the yeasts are there, they get exposed to the oxygen. Well, guess
Right.
what? It'll heat that up and go off feed. So L-buchneri bacteria, basically, they help from an inoculant standpoint when you're feeding that back out, that it kills them off. And that's really critical, especially in a drought type of a season.
Now, and Olivia, the question of chop length and moisture, a really key one as well, right? Because we want this to ensile in a, as uniformly as possible, but as quickly as possible, to exactly that, take care of those nitrates, kill some of those yeasts, and actually be preserved. So how are you advising growers when it comes to the actual harvest pass as to, what they might change on a drought stressed crop at the actual harvest pass?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of concerns in the last couple weeks. Just the crop is really drying down quickly, or it's already dead, or in some cases. And I think in some cases people thought it was maybe even drier than it actually was. So I guess I would just encourage growers to, a lot of their dealers, their seed dealers, they will do chipper days and whatnot, and that can give you kind of a rough idea of what the plant dry matter is. Between a drought year and a maybe normal moisture year, we'll call it, nothing really changes with the timing of it. We want to still aim for that 30 to 40% dry matter. That's not going to change. We want to make sure we're aiming for that kind of range, just so that we do get proper ensiling. We don't want it to be too wet or too dry. But I guess with this drier weather, the plant can dry down pretty quickly. So it is, we do want to make sure we're monitoring it kind of daily. With all of the sun and wind, the crop can dry down pretty quick. So keep an eye on that. But honestly, yeah, aiming for the same moisture that you would during a normal moisture year.
So Paul, Olivia brings up chipper days, which I'd never heard of. It makes it sound like it's like a potato, like poutine fest or something. But I love this. Yeah, wouldn't that be amazing?
Be fun.
So yeah, but it does bring up, and Mark shares this as well. I mean, the leaves start to dry down sometimes very, very quickly. But how hard is it to get a good assessment on moisture if, say, the cob and the stalk are still pretty, as Mark puts it, juicy, which is true. So how complicated does it become if you've got really dry leaves, but potentially still good moisture in the cob and the
Yeah,
stalk?
and again, you look at Lyndsey, roughly half of your yield comes from the cob, right? And if you look at your leaves, they're roughly 12 to 15% of your yield overall. So the leaves really don't matter that much. It's kind of looking at a picture and opening, or a book, and opening the cover and getting inside. It's that stalk and grain, especially the grain, that adds a lot of the moisture to it, or can. And then we're having issues, with the drought here. You could have a loamy soil at one end of the field and a sandy on the other, and you got totally different spectrums in terms of plant health and dryness. So we're encouraging growers. There's tools like satellite imagery. I can get a sense on good areas and bad, what percent of the field, and go sample those different, and then do your chipper days just to kind of help get a sense. And some people, if they got self-propelled, they can take the dry stuff off, first put it in the bottom of the bunk, put the wet on top, just for better packing. So there's different methods out there to help with that going forward. But it's we're trying to get as much starch as the energy. We're promoting 3/4 milk line, as long as we have the plant health and the moisture, right? So it's those components to help with it, to help growers overcome some of this grain loss that's out there this year with the drought in our area.
Olivia, you mentioned that in the conversation with Bern about the variability within a field or several fields, and how to manage that at harvest. Exactly that, of you may have certain areas that are on the edge of too dry, and other that are maybe ideal, but how do you sort of manage field by field, or that variability within it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what Paul said. Like, if you can do any aerial imagery and just get an idea of like what areas in the field might be a problem first, are going to dry up quicker, and sampling them like separately, treating them almost as different zones. I've had a few growers that have already kind of taken a pass a week or two ago on some of the headlands that were maybe a bit drier, and that were at the proper moisture, but then the middle of the field wasn't quite there yet. So I think it's kind of taking in a couple different pieces of the puzzle, and if you have to split up kind of when you're harvesting, that might be what we have to do this year.
Mm-hmm. Mark points out, Paul, you need kernels to have a milk line. This is true.
Yes.
And Mark is in an area very hard hit by drought. There are some areas with, very small, very poorly pollinated, perhaps not even really a cob at all. In those scenarios, Paul, like, do you consider, perhaps grazing it off? Are there producers in that situation where they're thinking the actual harvesting pass might not be worth it, or do they just need the feed and they'll just make do?
Well, I think in a lot of cases they might just need to feed and make do, and they talk about cobless corn. You get about a ton per foot, right? So if we got 6-7 foot corn, we still have 6 to 7 ton out there. Obviously, the nutritional value is not going to be there. We don't have the starch
Right.
component, and they talk a lot about drought corn is going to be 60 to 70% of normal corn from a feed value standpoint. So I still think there's some opportunity there. Again, I'm not a nutritionist, but work with your nutritionist, get that off, get it fermented the best you can, and then get a sample afterwards and kind of go from there and work through, mixing, could be high moisture corn, dry grain, whatever it may be, into the ration to help out moving forward. But
Mm-hmm.
it's tough, and because again,
Yeah.
we got some parts of the fields that are strictly cobless, and then you go 100 feet and you got a third of a cob or whatever. So it's going to be tough this year to make good quality feed overall that you got to live with for the next 365 days, right?
So Olivia, ultimately, and we'll probably bounce back and forth, but thinking about, as you mentioned, like this being fed out eventually, how do you work with your growers to sort of put that plan in place to anticipate, what, let's say you've got a pretty tough field, it does get ensiled okay, but maybe right. How do you sort of set them up to like best deal with when you're going to open those bags, how you might have to adjust rations to make up for the quality differences?
Yeah, I think it's getting them out in the field and kind of realizing and setting their expectations, I guess. Like it's going to be, they say higher in fiber just because of that lack of ear development. It'll be higher in crude protein just because of the nitrates that have accumulated in the plant, but it's definitely going to be lower in starch. So I think if you can get out with your agronomist in the field, kind of set those expectations, and then it's working with a nutritionist. Like Paul said, we're not nutritionists, but
That's right.
we help guide you as best as we can, but it's kind of putting all those pieces together. And I think if the agronomists and nutritionists can work together, then that's going to help set us up for some success as we feed out this and have those challenges.
Lyndsey, maybe we could pull up slide number 2, just looking at it from a
Absolutely.
digestibility standpoint. So the growing environment has a lot more influence on fiber digestibility. This is a study that we did in 2006 on a wet year, same hybrids, same locations, and then 2007, a drought year. And basically in the dry year, we get about 6 points better digestibility. So the environment out trumps the hybrid all over basically. But it
Okay.
just shows you in a year like this that we're going to have better digestibility, but unfortunately lower energy just because of less starch. Last year, 2024, we were encouraging growers to do the high chop because of the wet growing season. So again, it all depends on the season, but there's tools out there that growers can use, high chop, not or low chop, basically, depending on the growing environment to help offset some of those risks.
So, okay, so and BMR, just that's the brown midrib,
Brown
right?
midrib, yeah,
That's yeah.
and basically it showed that even in we can overcome brown midrib. Like brown midribs, yeah, it's got digestibility, but yield environment out trumps the hybrid, even a brown
Yeah.
midrib, year in and year out.
Okay. And that, I think, so this is one of those key questions, right? Is like obviously weather is going to dictate, what quality you can have, so we can manage some of these things, but we also just need to sort of expect certain things out of that feed. Like Olivia pointed out that, you're going to need to work with your nutritionist and anticipate what's going to be coming out of the bag based on the growing season that we had. But also, Paul, what you're saying is we can't really manage our way out of this. Weather is going to decide this one.
Exactly. And then
Yeah.
we've done some studies that showed, good parts of the field with good plant health versus poor, a 12-point difference in digestibility. That's huge. And that's just in the
Yeah.
same field, right? So where you go from nice green to basically dead plants. So it's going to
Yeah.
be a challenge, but you have to do the best that we can. And if we do the proper fermentation, length of cut, and that's part of the job to help with that moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are a few things, a few key points that we'll touch on. We're going to go to a clip and our first read, and then I do want to talk about some of the other challenges. Of course, maybe lodged corn. We did touch on cobless corn, but we'll talk about that as well. I did want to say hello to Kevin. Last week he was cutting silage, so glad you could join us, Kevin. But producer Jay, let's talk about. I do. This is actually a throwback. It's from 7 years ago with Leighton Kolk and Ryan Casco out of Western Canada, out of Alberta, talking about making quality silage. So producer Jay, if you would, we'll go to our clip.
I think over the years we've learned that we have to be patient when we're harvesting to get the silage off at the right time, especially corn. I think I've been prone to taking it off too early and having too high a moisture. So we aim for about 65% moisture on our corn, make sure that our kernels harden up nicely. We use a corn processor to crack the kernels. And we need to do a really good job packing it. Sometimes we get a little bit lazy because it's a long day and you want to get home. But and then probably the other thing is the as we're using the silage throughout the feeding period, managing our pit well, only uncovering it as we need it, and also keeping our silage face nicely groomed so that we don't have a lot of exposed silage that we're not using.
I think one of the more common ones is stretching it out over a long period of time, not having maybe the adequate equipment or manpower or to get the job done in a timely manner. If you can chop it quickly, chop it to correct length, get in the pile and pack it, put lots of horsepower, lots of pounds on that pile to pack it so the oxygen is out. And the faster you put it up, the better you pack it, and the quicker you cover it afterwards is huge.
Thank you to our show sponsors, the Corn School, Black Earth, and MNP. With deep roots in agriculture, MNP helps farm businesses make confident financial decisions. From planning to growth, their advisors are here to support your success. Learn more at mmp.ca. Anyway, I always dance. Okay, that video from 7 years ago, producer Jay shot that. I'd love, Jay, you should let us know in the chat how cold it was that day because it looks absolutely frigid. I don't know how the camera didn't freeze. But one of the reasons I wanted to choose that is, yes, the moisture, which we've sort of covered, that, we really do, a drought-stressed crop may appear drier than it is. And if you don't have kernels, that's going to sort of sway things. But you mentioned briefly, Paul, that question of, when you start to feed this, that you may have yeasts and spoilage and those sorts of things. So if we've put a drought stressed crop into a bag or into a bunk, do we have to be on the lookout for more spoilage when we feed it out?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And just because we have more yeast that are in the environment and dry environment, and so that's where this, a selection of a inoculant basically to help with that, ones that have L-buchneri in it, would help basically when you feed it out, it kills those yeast and everything else. So again, it's more in those June, July, and August hot month time frame. If I was feeding and you feed at different times of the year, you can select different inoculants for that. And it was another point too, Lyndsey. It was just interesting when it was going through the video about that whole processing too, because we're going to have some corn silage that's half milk line, 3/4 other that's only quarter, and just using a processing cup, so a liter cup, taking a scoop and then laying it out. And if we have more than 4 kernels that are not processed, we have to do a better job on the processor, setting it tighter basically to get the job done. So just taking time 2 or 3 times a day, looking at that to get a good processing score basically for silage going forward.
I was actually going to ask you about that. A, because I'd like one of those cups. And B, is it, and Olivia, maybe I'll ask this as well. I mean, you mentioned the chipper days, you mentioned, I mean, is it even more important to be making sure that you're processing and getting the right crack and cut length and the right actual mix when a crop is drought stressed?
Yeah, I think anything we can do to kind of make sure that we're storing this crop properly, then yeah, it's crucial.
And if you also have fun cups, I would like those as well. They're a lot of fun. Because I hear you can wash them and use them for other things. Anyway, now, okay, so one of the other things, of course, is the packing and getting it covered right away. So we've talked about inoculants. On that note, Paul, are there a lot of inoculants I'm gonna have to sift through to try? You've mentioned one particular one. Like, I don't really know inoculants that well. Do I get a whole variety I get to choose from, or are we really limited?
Well, it's you're going to have crop specific inoculants. So you think of alfalfa; it's high in protein, so going to be high in nitrogen. Totally different fermentation process and bacteria needed
Right.
that compared to corn silage. And then within the corn silage world, it all depends on. We basically sell 3 different types, but if I just want a fermentation only, quick and everything else, and then the second one would be this. If I'm going to have bunk issues when feeding out to reduce the yeast
Yeah.
in the heating, and then if it gets to be a wet year that digestibility is going to be an issue, well, then we have a fiber digestibility inoculant. So basically 3 different types that, you sit down with the producer and what's your need and what's the season like, and then pick that
Yeah.
inoculant basically moving ahead. The
Okay.
other thing that we always talk about too is I know we cover our bunkers with plastic, but an oxygen bearer limited layer as well is really critical, especially in these kind of years to prevent further heating within the bunk, especially on the tops and the sides and that kind of stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, we have a few other issues out there that I want to touch on. I don't know if any of you have seen tar spot lately. I'm going to guess that in the droughty areas didn't necessarily end up being a big issue. But we do have some reports, of course, of corn rootworm damage. And so we have some lodged corn. We have some perhaps not as great standing corn as we would like. And then, of course, we have to think about, so that's sort of, where we're already at. But then we have to think about the standability of this crop if the silage hasn't come off yet, or as we move towards grain harvest. So, Olivia, I'll start with you from the perspective of tar spot first, and then on to any of the rootworm challenges.
Yeah. So in my area, I cover tar spot. I've only really seen it more so along Lake Erie, kind of along that region. Other spots, it's kind of just starting to pop up. We really haven't had that leaf wetness. They say 7 hours of leaf wetness for at least 7 consecutive days. We were going into the corn crop when I was scouting, this July, it'd be dry by 9 o'clock in the morning. So really different than last year where we had tons of moisture and it really popped up early. And that was really what kind of impacted yields, just it coming in so early. Now with it coming in later, it's kind of just starting. I would say we're past those critical growth stages. We shouldn't have that much of an impact on yield with tar spot coming in now. I do get the question from a lot of growers, well, why did I spray a fungicide this year? I could have probably gotten away with it. But the thing is, I don't think you're going to see maybe those 60 to 80 bushel yield differences that we saw last year. I do think you'll still see that return on investment. Those values are just going to be a little bit lower. But I do think one thing I did see with growers who did spray a fungicide, I think it definitely helped with some plant health. And definitely in some of those droughty areas, I had a grower who had the same variety planted same day across the road, one field sprayed, one unsprayed. And you could definitely see the difference that fungicide brought to that field that was sprayed. So maybe we're not dealing with tar spot, but that was another benefit that a fungicide brought. And then as for the corn rootworm aspect of it, I am in a large area with corn on corn just because of the livestock with many dairy producers in like the Perth, Oxford, Huron area. And so corn rootworm is something that we have been battling for the last couple of years. Last year didn't seem to be so bad, and I think that's just because we probably did have that feeding, but with having such adequate moisture levels, roots were kind of able to regrow pretty quickly. This year, not really the same story. It's been pretty droughty, and having that basically the larva eating the roots in those earlier growth stages, that kind of is helping with, or not helping with, moisture uptake as well. And I would say that it's been a large problem. And usually when I get called out to fields, it's kind of that July timeframe. It's usually when growers are spraying a fungicide, or maybe there was just a storm that came through. And what we basically have is lodged corn, because those roots have been clipped. And so the plant can't anchor itself to the soil. So now on top of that drought stress, we have some lodged corn, which is not easy to harvest. And it's a pain in the butt, to be frank, at harvest time. So that adds another element to things for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, Paul, so certainly happens out here as well with some rootworm issues. Perhaps, I mean, as Olivia pointed out, the more fields you have with corn on corn or continuous corn, the higher your risk potentially of that rootworm damage. When it comes to lodged corn and it comes to harvest, it is a pain in the butt. Is there anything else we need to worry about? Do we just have to slow down and take our time? What do we have to know about with lodged corn? And then I want to talk about standability of what's still standing.
Sure. Yeah, maybe we could go to slide number 3, Jay, if we could, please, and kind of maybe jumping a bit here, but it's that whole aspect of prioritizing our fields and everything else. Lyndsey, we didn't have tar spot in the area this year at all that we found, and a lot of it we just don't have the inoculum. But you think back to the growing season that we had, same with Olivia, didn't have those leaf wetness hours, but we didn't get a lot of storms that came up from the south to basically blow the inoculum in here yet. So we're kind of lucky from that standpoint. But going forward here in the next few weeks, you think about the corn crop, it just wants to produce the next year's kids, basically, right? Next year's grain, and it's going to do whatever it can to do that. And this year we just didn't have a lot of nitrogen uptake, drought stress, everything else. So that plant's going to cannibalize itself to continue that grain growth. So stocks are potentially going to be a bigger issue this year in lodging and everything else. I was in a field today and just walking through the fields, and you push some of the plants, and 5-10% of the plants are already starting to potentially lodge over, right? And it's going to get worse as we get drier corn, mature corn, and everything else going forward. So that's definitely one thing we want to worry about. And then cob drop too. Just the pinching of the shanks in the ears, they're not going to be as strong as what they should be in that situation. So we want to watch out for cob drop. And so between the stalk lodging and cob drop is, we're going to have to get out there, prioritize fields. And if some fields look like they're going to be going down, we got to get as much crop as we can into the bin to help offset some of these costs this year. So we might have to, pay a few extra points of drying costs, but to me, that's going to be worth it compared to what you potentially could lose down the road lying in the field and everything else. So again, it's going to be field by field, soil type by soil type, geography, rain, fall, and everything else. But just that's what we're talking to growers in our area about, just making sure we're scouting the field, scout, and prioritize and go from there.
Yeah. So we talk about, Olivia, the push test or the pinch test, and I feel like it's really early to be talking about that, but exactly that. I mean, it does, as Paul points out, really points to, just how stressed some of these plants have been, and exactly that sort of that push to fill that cob and make those viable seeds really sort of speeds up the process. So are you already sort of evaluating some of the standability of some of the fields that you're walking? Is that something you've been doing for a while now? What does that conversation look like with, a grower if you've maybe are noticing some stalk integrity issues?
Yeah, I definitely think it is of mind. And I would say the crop is pretty, like, it's advanced in some parts of like Norfolk County. They were, fully dented a couple weeks ago already. So we are going to reach that black layer shortly. So yeah, standability is definitely a concern. You can just see the crop, it's kind of firing up on the stalk, starting kind of the last couple of weeks. So obviously doing a push test, just go down the row, kind of push the cobs. And if you're seeing like if it's falling over quite easily, that's definitely one that you would want to prioritize for sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, Paul, I asked this question before we went live, and I think others would maybe have the same, so I'll ask it again. In a situation like this, where we are talking about potential stock integrity, etc., putting aside for a moment the nitrate question, would a rain now make it more likely that stocks are going to tumble, or less likely, or will it not matter?
I think in most cases it really won't matter if we have rain. I mean, we're getting to be, 80-90% of the way there in terms of finishing or the crops being reached maturity and everything else. If you look at the textbook values and everything else, we probably still need 1 or 2 inches of available water to finish the crop. Is it going to add more yield? No, but it could help maintain what's there. But I think a lot of the damage has been done from the growing season, because you think of that crop that's been growing since pollination time. We've been under stress, and it's the plant has done what it's needed to do, and that's robbed from other parts of the plant to make that grain. So it potentially is, the damage is done, and it's just something we got to keep a watch out for. Weather's going to play a big factor, especially if we get into later planted corn and we get freezing rain or snow and all that kind of stuff. That's just going to make it worse. I really get worried about it's you start looking at stock lodging scores that every company has out there, but then plant near height too. So I'm a tall person, 6'2". If I got stuff over my shoulder, a big flag basically waving there, that's more of a concern than if it's at my chest
Lyndsey
height
height.
kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
Lyndsey height, exactly. So
Yeah, if
just
it's
differences that
Lyndsey height corn, totally different.
exactly. So again,
Yeah.
it comes
Yeah.
knowing what fields prioritizing and hybrid traits and everything else that kind of can help you as well going forward from that standpoint.
Yeah, Olivia?
Yeah, I agree with everything Paul said there for sure.
And
Pete,
it's
oh, go ahead.
sorry, and it's interesting too, just what Olivia was saying. Like we didn't have tar spot. We've got a bunch of tar spot fungicide trials out there. So I'm anxious to see. I agree with Olivia. We're not going to get those 40 or 60 bushels, but I think we're going to get that 10 or 12, just better plant health. So it'll be interesting to see this area, what that does. So.
Mm-hmm. And Kevin offered as well, fungicide will help with controlling mycotoxins in the silage as well. That is a question, Olivia, on that side of for a sprayed field versus not. I mean, you've got that stay green, you've got that healthier plant. Do you find, potentially in a year where gibberella would be an issue, like there are other advantages even if tar spot wasn't the main drag this year?
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like if you are getting out in your fields around this time, like I'm peeling back some ears and you can start to see some of that jib there. So, and I would say Western bean cutworm's been an issue in my territory. So anytime we have that feeding in the corn ear, that's basically a vector for disease to come in. And so gibberella is of concern. So that's definitely where that fungicide, if it's covering for ear molds, then that's going to be a benefit as well.
Yeah. I think that, Paul, to that point, where tar spot was the biggest concern, there are still other advantages to that fungicide pass that we may still get some return on. It just won't be as dramatic as where the tar spot was last year.
No, for sure. And that whole plant health and then standability, and some growers, they'll just put a fungicide on from that standability standpoint, from a harvestability standpoint, especially if they're later in the season, right? And taking stuff on and swear by it. So definite advantages. And again, every year's a different year. We'll have some data to back that up this fall and kind of go from there.
Yeah, Pete says that Albert Tenuta has tar spot at Rodney now. So that warms Albert's heart because he loves disease. And the rest of us can just learn from him. And Pete also mentions, and I said this before we went live, that we had rain in the forecast as well here in the Ottawa Valley, and it got taken out of the forecast. And then they put it's like it's 5 to 7 days away, and then they just keep pushing it further and further. So it does feel like we might be in a bit of a dry or continued dry spell for a little while, and we'll see if
We
when
need some
it
rain
breaks.
for wheat, right? For
Well,
planting winter wheat.
yes, yeah, Paul, did Peter pay you to say that? I
Exactly.
mean, but it is. It is also a question. I mean, we want obviously the rain to come back for recharge for next year as well. But you're right, we're going to have winter wheat going in the ground here, if not already, shortly, and we're going to need some water to get it up and going. Mark's got a question. Will Western bean cutworm eat into a cob without kernels? Or do they only want the kernels? Does anyone know this? Olivia, do you have thoughts about whether or not? I'm going to imagine the kernels have the yummy, delicious sugars in them, and that's what they're after. But I think that if you're like, are you going to starve them out, Mark? Is that the question?
I think typically, yeah, they want that food source, so it's going to be feeding on the cob. Typically don't see them feeding really anywhere else in the plant. It's more so like on the silks and then into the cob. But Paul, do you have any other comments on that?
Yeah, I would agree too. And it's when it's silking and pollen shedding, you got a high protein source basically there, right? So that's what they're going after. So I would say the same thing, Olivia. I mean, I'm not a bug expert, but just understanding what they're going for from a food source standpoint, that definitely makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw this
yeah.
year, I'm seeing less Western bean cutworm in my area this year. Like normally last year this time, every 5/10th plant you'd find them. Now it's hard to find them, and just again, Mother Nature growing environments are different and stuff, and so
Mm-hmm.
just what I'm seeing my way, and that's again, it's a different geography though. Keeping that in mind
Yeah.
for listeners here.
We sent them all to Olivia. So there you go. Now,
All the
Pete,
corn rootworm and all the Western
all
bean,
of it.
yeah.
That's okay. We usually get all the white mold here in our soybeans, so we keep that this way, right, Paul? That's what we do. Okay.
Exactly. Not much mold
Yeah.
this year.
No, not much at all. But that's okay too. So Peter wants to know. Now, this isn't corn. This is alfalfa. But thinking along those same lines, is there anything special we need to do with droughted hay silage? I see lots of fourth cut alfalfa going into bunks today, Peter said. Paul, do you have any thoughts on alfalfa? Olivia, do you love alfalfa? You can choose to answer or not. But do we need to worry about it?
I'll let Paul comment.
Yeah, I'm not kind of out of the alfalfa business, to be honest with you, with Corteva.
Same.
So haven't thought much about alfalfa lately. But again, a lot of it comes down to, I think we've had a shortage of hay, basically, right? Second cut's been pretty dismal and everything else. And you talk about this, critical period, and then we got to have enough growth to get alfalfa established to go through the winter months. But it's going to be on a case by case scenario. Customers, depending on what they have from a feed inventory standpoint, there could be potentially the same thing though with alfalfa if I got a heavy rain and influx in drought situations. But other than that, that's about as much as I'm going to comment on it.
I will say, from my perspective, and Pete and I have talked about this on the radio show as well, that you have to worry about the critical harvest period, or as Christine O'Reilly would call it, the critical rest period. So if you're taking alfalfa now, I'm going to guess you really, really need it, because not great timing necessarily. Also, people are saying they had trouble with the chat. Not sure what that's about, but we'll look into it. Okay, we have one last clip that I'm going to play, and then we've got a read. And this will sort of dovetail us into sort of our last discussion of the night, talking about staging, of course, and also I do want to shift gears slightly because silage will be done before we know it, but this grain corn coming is likely also going to require a bit of extra babysitting, just with the year we've had. So producer Jay, if you would.
Yeah, so R6 occurs like shortly after your silage timing, which we want to get is at R5.5. R6 is going to be the end of the reproductive life cycle. When looking at this, we want to look and grab an ear, pull all that husks back, and just break it in half. It's going to be the same kind of thing when you're silage timing, but you just want to check for that milk line. R6 is going to be when the milk line gets all the way down to that kernel tip, and it's going to be black on your kernel tip instead of white. So these ones aren't quite there yet, but that's going to be your main indicator.
Right. So what stage is this at? How much further do we have to go?
So right now we're about R5.5, so right around silage timing. We can see it's about 3/4 or a little bit more on milk line. So we typically say you're gonna have your plants dry down at 0.5% per day in the ideal conditions. So as long as it stays above 10 degrees, your plants are going to continue drying down. R6 occurs when they're about 30 to 35% kernel moisture. Right now these are a little bit higher. I'm going to say about 45, 50, give or take.
Okay.
So these are going to take a little bit longer. We're not quite there. It's been a little bit cooler, so it is taking a little bit longer to dry down.
Our sponsors for the Agronomists are MNP, Black Earth, and the Corn School. From tillage strategies to nitrogen management, hybrid selection, pest management, and more, Real Ag's Corn School is a video series that helps you face every moment of the growing season. The Corn School is made possible by support from BASF and Pride Seeds. Learn more at cornschool.com. All right. So, the one comment about dry down. Now, we have sort of the opposite problem in a droughty year, but not necessarily, in that we still want to wait to get that ideal moisture window. Now, Pete told me today on Real Ag Radio that in some areas the corn is actually not drying down as quickly as we might think. Paul, do you have any suspicions as to why that is? And then I will tell you if Pete is right or not.
I just think it all comes down to stress and everything else, right? You look at that corn crop, like there was that first week in August or second week, whatever it was, we were 40 degrees for 4 or 5 days. I mean, if I'm in that environment, I'm stressed too, and just your overall hormones in the plant and stuff, and it's just signaling to that plant that, hey, I'm stressed and trying to do as much reserves to keep going and processing ahead. I don't have much more of an answer than that, but it all comes down to environment, stress, temperatures. You look at your curve and temperatures and how much the crop grows, and once we start getting on the other side of that 30 35 degrees kind of thing, 32, it starts to drop off. So it's just slowing down and shutting down everything else. And then nighttime temperatures too have been a lot more dramatic this year than in the past as well, right? So it's interesting because people think that we're ahead of heat units overall year to year comparison to last year, but we're actually a day or two behind. But you look back to May and June, we lost a lot. But in July and August, we're way ahead. And it's just that whole stress component to it of the plant.
Yeah, on the average, we're actually kind of average, but it has not felt at all like an average year for a lot of things. Paul, you don't have to remind me of those hot days. I'm still having like flashbacks because I do not do well in that. Yeah, I do not do well in that heat. But Olivia,
4 months, we'll take that heat, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in a few months from now, I'll remember it fondly. But Olivia, that point about and maybe your crop, as you said, like for some of your area, the crop was maybe further advanced, so maybe less of an issue. But for a crop that's still, maybe not black layered, have you noticed it's a little slower? And do you think it is the cool nights or the cool temps that we've had?
Yeah, I definitely think it could be like, so we do have some weather stations kind of placed regionally. And so I was looking today at a few, kind of in the Park Hill area, we were at like 2,800 heat units as of a May 7th planting date. And then like Moncton, that was more like 2,675. So I do think like we're only a few days behind, but definitely, as you and Paul have both said, definitely some more drastic swing in temperatures, which doesn't help when the plant is already stressed.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, for our last few moments here, a few things. The silage crop will get done, and then of course all eyes will be on our grain corn, and what decisions we may have to make for this. Paul, what is sort of top of mind for you thinking about the next few weeks and what that means for the grain corn crop and harvest?
Well, it comes down to prioritizing fields and then issues like proper combine setup, because we're going to go from spongy, small little cobs to half decent cobs in the same field, and just paying attention to that combine setup, stripper plates, and everything else, making sure that we're taking time to set it. And we're going to have to adjust it on a field by field basis and everything else. There's potentially 2-4 more fines and everything else. So from a storage standpoint, just making sure that what happens with those fines. Could we get hot spots in their bins and stuff as well, and just keeping tabs on that to make sure that we get as much crop into the bin as we can and store it properly moving forward. And then again, the potential for crop drop, stock lodging, that kind of stuff, just keeping tabs on it and on each field, basically field by field scouting.
Producer Jay, actually, can you bring out, I think it's slide 4 we haven't looked at yet.
Yeah.
I think that's on the grain harvest. Yeah. So Olivia, adding to that, helping producers prioritize fields, definitely. But how do you approach this as far as, the season we've had and what might have to change for this harvest season?
Yeah, I think look at it again as a field by field basis. Look at what challenges that you've had in those fields throughout the growing season. What pests might have been an issue. Again, corn rootworm that'll affect your grain harvest too. And same with Western mean cutworm. Like I said, we might have some issues with vomitoxin if you did have feeding kind of in those ears. So those would be another case where I would prioritize that field. Making notes kind of what you've seen for this growing season and how it could impact some of your decisions for next growing season. Using rootworm as a specific example, obviously rotation is pretty key there. So making sure if it has been corn on corn previously, trying to rotate out if we can. And if that's not possible, potentially using some of that new technology with the RNAi aspect for below ground. But definitely field by fields. And trying to take in what we've learned this season and apply it to what we can do for next season. Obviously, we can't control the weather, but there are other things that we can control.
I think that's a really key point, Olivia, is, there's some things that we're not going to change because they are the right decision. Just the weather doesn't always work. But I mean, I think the rootworm is an excellent example where, clearly you've got to do something differently because, it is an issue. And if it's an issue in your fields, it's going to be next year. So you've just got to rotate. And I think we've even done a few stories about, different growers potentially, swapping fields with each other to try and get that corn onto acres that hasn't had corn in the last year or two, in trying to avoid some of these rootworm issues. So you might have to get creative, everybody. And hey, maybe throw a different crop in there, right, Pete? Okay. But Paul, a few other things though too, along the same lines, there's also things that just because this year turned out the way it did, there are things we shouldn't change for next year. Right?
Yeah.
So what shouldn't we change maybe for next year?
So exactly. Yeah, you look at like this year. So as an example, I always do corn population trials, 26, 30, 34, 38. In the past, it's always been that, depending on the yield environment, that 34,000, 36,000 kind of wins. This year, it's going to be totally opposite, right? The 26 to 30, the lower population is going to do better. Are you going to plant that next year? I would hope not, and don't do a complete 180 and head the other way, the other direction. I've been 28 years with Pioneer, and this is the worst I've ever seen in 28 years. Such a widespread. Is it going to happen the same next year? I don't think so. If you can predict that, Lyndsey, you're going to have a good wealthy retirement, right?
Absolutely.
So and it's just don't change practice and everything else. Keep good management practices, good plans. Both Olivia and I work in the seed industry. Don't go and throw a hybrid out just because it's had the one field, one bad year wonder. Look at lots of data, lots of environments, a lot of growing seasons, and that's going to help you predict what's going to be the best for the 2026 growing season going forward. And stay the course. Some folks are talking about cutting fertility back and everything else. You got to feed a crop to make money. You got to spend some money, and I think next year we really have to focus on getting as much yield as we can. Some growers are going to be economically challenged this year, unfortunately, due to the conditions, but I think next year we can help them get the most. It's going to help offset some of that to move forward from a farming standpoint.
Now, Olivia, sort of on that note, with growers, looking at selections for next year, is a tough year sometimes an opportunity though too to really look at the ones that work well on certain fields or for certain growers?
Yeah, I would say it definitely is. And with a lot of our plots, that is notes that we're taking. Like we're taking drought tolerance notes on hybrids, on existing hybrids, and then ones that we're thinking about introducing to our lineup. So quite honestly, as an agronomist, I really do like seeing those hybrids put to the test and seeing how they
Right.
hold up, because it's nice to have a well-rounded hybrid, right? We want something that is able to kind of work hard for us in those stressful conditions and still do fairly well. So it is nice to see that. And yeah, for hybrid selection, tar spot wasn't an issue this year. Maybe we didn't have issues with a lot of diseases, but don't forget about that. We want a well-rounded hybrid. We're not selecting for just one thing. We're not just selecting on drought tolerance. That is a piece of the puzzle, but we obviously have to keep in mind a bunch of different agronomic characteristics when we're selecting a hybrid.
Paul, I haven't been here as long as you said, with your multi-decade career. But I have been told, and we've had a few dry years in the past little while, but around here in the Ottawa Valley, 2012 was the last very severe drought for the area, which means it isn't that common. In which case, anticipating that next year will be the same could potentially, if you're going to exactly that, cut back fertility or cut back populations, you could shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like going to the racetrack, right? Betting on a horse, and that last horse that never wins today. You're going to bet on it tomorrow? I wouldn't. So it's just, every year's going to be different. And I think we got to be optimistic, and Mother Nature has a way of righting herself. Right. So I think things will be fine next year, and it's going to be a different challenge, but we've got tools and seed traits and the hybrids that have changed a lot in the last 25 years that help us manage through some of this moving forward.
Okay, now I saw Sean Haney briefly jumped into the chat to make sure it was working and asked a ridiculous question that I am going to ask, but Rob Miller wanted to share, have been a few corn fields for fungicide plots for the last couple of weeks with lots of weed escapes. Proper weed ID. Trust Rob Miller to bring it back to weeds. But it is a good point. While you're out there checking for stock integrity and doing these push tests, take a look at what else is out there. Never miss an opportunity to see what might also be out there. Okay, now, so Sean's question, and you have to be honest, and I'll be honest too. Have you ever actually eaten silage? Have you tried it? Paul, you first.
I've smelt it. I've never eaten it. I'm not a cow. I'm sorry.
We are not ruminants, Sean. We can't digest it properly. Olivia, have you tried? I have smelled it. I don't love it as much as people who are like who grew up here. But anyway, no?
No, I have not. I have not eaten it before.
Okay. I will tell you that I have also not eaten it. I do smell it. Hay, though, I have tried. It's not delicious, and it is not palatable. So, and Ray DeBanco, also, that's a yuck on eating silage. I gotcha. And yes, do not use the house microwave to dry down your samples to do your tests. It smells terrible, everybody. Go to the shop.
Air fryer works the best.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
You know what, Paul, we're going to do a whole episode on the greatest agronomic uses of non-agronomic tools. And the air fryer is going on the list. Absolutely. That is a fantastic idea. I love that. Okay. So we're out of time. But I do want to sort of recap the most important things. So Olivia, in having those conversations with the growers that still have silage out, what would be your number one thing that you would remind them of for harvesting droughted corn?
Yeah, I would say kind of stay the course, stick to the basics, aiming for that proper moisture, not really altering cut height just because we are going to maybe have some shorter plants. So we don't want to reduce tonnage even more. Kind of just reminding them that we do still have, and in some cases, and I'm not in Eastern Ontario, so I'm speaking for the territory I cover. We still have, a decent crop out there. We can still have, 60 to 75% of that feed value of a normal crop with some drought stress corn. So I would encourage people to kind of, remember the basics, target that moisture so that we get the proper ensiling process. And if you ever have any questions or concerns, definitely reach out to your agronomist and they can help guide you in the right direction.
Paul, and you?
I'd be echo a lot of what Olivia said. I'm a big believer in inoculants just to speed that process up and make sure that, because you think about that whole fermentation process, so bacteria eating your corn silage to ferment it, and they're smart. They're going to be like me. They're going to go after the steak and the ice cream. They're going to leave the salad, right?
Yes,
the lettuce.
that's
So
right.
trying to keep as much starch as you can in there, and just kind of going through that, the chop length, moisture, everything else. We've got whatever Mother Nature dealt with us, but from a livestock, we've got to live with that for another 365 days until we do this again next year, right? So let's do it as
Right.
best that we can to get as much value out of it as we can moving forward.
And I did want to mention, I know we touched on it briefly on the nitrate side, but I do know there are producers out there that may end up either offering their corn for grazing, or producers that may try to graze corn. It can work, absolutely, but same caveat on that one. The nitrates are a risk, and you do need to test because, as Olivia points out, fermentation will deal with some of those, but if you're grazing it off,
Green chop.
there's no fermentation. Yeah, so really important. Yeah, exactly that. Or green chop. If you're taking it straight off the field and feeding it, nitrates can still be an issue. Absolutely. Okay, Olivia, Paul, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, very informative. Thank you, everyone in the comments for seeing it through. Sounds like everybody eventually got through to make their comments, so I appreciate it. And of course, we'll be back next week with another episode of The Agronomists, 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Olivia. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks. It's good.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.